Watch the encore presentation of First Ladies from Martha Washington to Ida McKinley, weeknights starting next week at 9 Eastern on C-SPAN.
And the U.S. Senate about to gavel in. Senators will begin today with general speeches. Then at 11 Eastern, they'll consider a nomination for the U.S. Appeals Court. That vote will be followed by a vote on limiting debate to 2014 spending on transportation, housing, and community development projects. This afternoon, senators debate the nomination of Samantha Power for U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. We have live coverage now of the Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
Dr. Barry Black will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal Lord God, the source of our life, you are high above all, yet in all. Keep us from becoming weary in doing what is right, as you use us for your instruments in these challenging times. Empower our senators to bring your freedom to those shackled by fear. Help them to lift the burdens that are too heavy for people to carry. Lengthen their vision that they may see beyond today and make decisions that will have an impact for eternity. And Lord, in a special way, bless Dave Schiappa as he prepares to transition to new vocational opportunities. Thank you for his decades of faithful service for you and country on Capitol Hill. Be gracious to him and his family. We pray in your loving name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., August 1st, 2013. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Brian Schatz, a senator from the state of Hawaii, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President pro tempore.
Majority Leader. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Majority Leader.
Yeah, I have a few matters of...
We are in a quorum call.
Yeah, I would ask consent to be terminated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, following leader remarks, the Senate will be in a morning business till 11 o'clock this morning. The time until that will be equally divided and controlled between the Majority Leader and the Republican Leader. At 11, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the Chen nomination to be a United States Circuit Judge for the Federal Circuit. Also at 11, there will be a filing deadline for all second-degree amendments to the transportation bill. At noon, there will be 2 roll call votes on confirmation of Chen and cloture on the THUD bill. Following those votes, the Senate will recess until 2 p.m. for a bipartisan caucus meeting. This afternoon, there will be a roll call vote on the confirmation of the Power nomination to be Ambassador to the United Nations.
Mr. President.
Republican Leader.
This morning, I'd like to say a few words about somebody who won't be around when we get back after the recess. After nearly 30 years in the Senate, Dave Schiappa's hanging up his cleats. Dave's not exactly a household name. I think he actually likes it that way. But there's no question to those of us who work here day in and day out that nobody is more essential to the running of this place than Dave. To the extent that we get anything done around here, it's largely because of Dave. And to the extent that we're not getting into shouting matches and food fights the rest of the time, well, that's largely thanks to Dave, too. He's been the glue and he's been the grease that keeps this place functioning, and we're really going to miss him. As Secretary for the Republican majority and minority under 3 different leadership offices, Dave's been the eyes and the ears on the floor for Republican leaders going back more than a decade. He's also been our chief diplomat on the other side. He's answered a million questions from all of us at all hours, always with the same tact, wicked sense of humor, and sharp mind that's made him not just an indispensable help to our conference, but also the kind of guy you just like having around this place. I know I'm speaking for everybody when I say that. When I announced Dave's departure to the leadership team earlier this week, the entire room, senators and staff, erupted in applause. I assure you, it wasn't because folks were glad to see him go. There's just nobody you'd rather be with in a foxhole or just killing time on the Senate floor than Dave. Now, Dave's had a pretty illustrious career before he got the big office up on the 3rd floor. Prior to joining the Senate as a cloakroom assistant at the tender age of 21, legend has it that he did stints as a bartender. That was while he was in college. And as a hot dog vendor out on the National Mall during summers in high school. As far as I know, these are the only 2 jobs outside the Senate that Dave's ever had. Somehow they turned out to be great preparation for this place. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but I'm sure we could all come up with some interesting theories about that. So Dave came here right out of college, back when there were no cameras on the floor, just a radio. His job back then was basically to perform the role of play-by-play announcer, telling officers what was happening out here on the floor, matching the voices with names, and just letting everybody know where things stood at all times. I wanted to have a poster out here with a photo of Dave from those days, but all the photos have mysteriously somehow disappeared. Someone suggested it might have something to do with the fact that Dave sported a pretty serious 80s mustache back then. Maybe Cheryl can dig up that good photo from the family collection. In 1994, Dave moved out of the cloakroom and onto the floor as the Republican floor assistant. 2 years after that, he was named Assistant Secretary for the majority. And 2 weeks before 9/11, in August 2001, Senator Lott named him Secretary for the majority. Since then, the 2 parties have swung back and forth a couple of times, but Dave's been one of the constants, smoothing out all the rough edges during 1,000 legislative fights, providing indispensable strategic advice to me and to the rest of our conference, and just generally keeping everybody on both sides informed of everything that's going on out here. It's not easy. It's not easy telling senators they won't get an amendment they've been fighting for or that they have to wait. But Dave's always had the perfect temperament for that job. Nobody on earth, nobody, knows more about the Senate precedent and procedure than Dave Schiappa. And nobody wears their knowledge and skill more lightly. So we're going to miss him a lot. We'll all miss his Dave-isms, whether he's reporting that some senator just showed up in the cloakroom in a 3-point stance or that the week is shaping up to be a nothing burger. Those are Dave-isms. And he'll take some secrets, hopefully, with him. It will forever remain a mystery, for example, how Dave stuffs all those cards into his suit coat pockets. Ask Dave a question about anything, and he'll have the answer written on some card inside his coat. The secrets of the Senate are contained on those cards. They say there are no indispensable men, though many of us have long suspected that Dave's the exception. I guess we'll soon find out. Dave, thanks for all you've done for all of us and for your devotion to the institution. I know how much the Senate means to you personally, and we all appreciate how much you've given to it over the years. Some folks complain about the hours and the unpredictable schedule around here, but Dave's got us all beat. He's not only here whenever we are, he's here after the lights go out, finishing up the business of the day, sending out emails, tying up loose ends or loose tarps, as he might put it. We're all glad you finally have a little predictability in your life. Which brings me to my last point, which is almost actually the most important. Nobody who has a family can handle this place without an understanding spouse. So I want to thank Cheryl for putting up with this place over the last 23 years. Dave tells the story that early on in their marriage, Cheryl got Dave tickets to a show at the Kennedy Center for his birthday. When he called to tell her something had come up and that he couldn't make it, she didn't know what he was talking about. Dave explained that he was stuck, and there just wasn't anything he could do about it. It's just how the Senate works. It was the last time she questioned his job or his schedule. So as much as I'm here to thank Dave, I want to thank Cheryl. I want Cheryl to know we're just grateful to her for all the sacrifices she's made over the years to make it work for Dave and their family. Ask Dave why he's been here so long, and he'll tell you it's the people. But the truth is, Dave's one of the best this place has ever seen. I have no doubt about it. Dave, on behalf of the entire Senate family, thanks for everything. You'll be missed. Harry, I say my friend Majority Leader, let me call up a resolution before your comments, and then we'll move on. I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-Res 212, and that the clerk read the resolution. And this time I'm going to have the clerk read the resolution.
The clerk will read the resolution.
S-Res 212, commending David J. Chiappa. Whereas David Chiappa has loyally served the Senate for 29 years, his entire professional career, starting in the Senate in December 1984. Whereas David Chiappa grew up in Maryland and graduated from DeMatha Catholic High School, the University of Maryland, and Johns Hopkins University. Whereas David Chiappa rose through all the positions in the Republican cloakroom, finally serving as either Secretary for the Majority or Secretary for the Minority for the last 3 Republican leaders. Whereas David Chiappa has at all times discharged the duties of his office with great dedication, diligence, and sense of service, thus earning the respect of Republican and Democratic senators alike, as well as their staffs. And whereas his good humor, storytelling ability, and easygoing manner have made him an invaluable member of the Senate family. Now therefore be it resolved that the Senate expresses its appreciation to David Chiappa and his family and commends him for his outstanding and faithful service to the Senate. The Secretary of the Senate shall transmit a copy of this resolution to David J. Chiappa.
Unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
I object. I'll withdraw my objection.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
in addition to David leaving, Rohit Kumar is also leaving. I don't know what he did for Senator McConnell, but most of the time I didn't like it. But I learned in our conversations, most of them at the back of the room here, what a fine man he is and how smart he is. He's incredibly intelligent. He's good at his job. And as I've just indicated, a little too good sometimes. Even though we at times knew what was happening because he was behind it. I'm really sorry to see him leave the Senate. He's a good person. I admire him and have such great respect for him. I wish him success and happiness in his next endeavor. He has a beautiful young daughter that he boasts about all the time, rightfully so. He and his wife Hillary, I'm confident will have a very pleasant life outside the Senate, even though we'll all miss him. Mr. President, when I learned that David Schiappa was going to leave, I had a brief conversation with him at the back of the chamber here, and I'm not much for being very emotional, but if there were ever a time when I felt like shedding a tear, it was in saying, as I did, goodbye to David. Parting is such sweet sorrow, and that's what I said to him, and it really is. It's from Shakespeare, good night, parting is such sweet sorrow, and it really is. If you're looking for someone who is a true Washington insider, you need look no further than David. He was actually born in Washington, D.C., and for a quarter of a century has made the trains run on time in the Republican cloakroom. For 13 of those years, he served as Republican secretary. He's been secretary when, as the Republican leader mentioned, when Republicans held the majority and the minority. And regardless of who controlled this chamber, my observation was that he's always managed the floor with integrity and an even temper. He's been a real pleasure to work with. When Gary wasn't around, his counterpart, I would go up to Dave and ask him a question. I never had any concern about the answer because he would always tell me the truth. Sometimes I didn't like to hear the truth, but he was always very forthright and candid. No matter how bad things got on the floor between members, Dave and his Democratic counterpart, Gary Myrick, were always looking for a path forward. Gary Myrick has been so important to this body, along with Dave. How these people love these jobs, these staff members. I try to tell people about my staff, about Senate staff in general. I mean, they do this because it's public service. He's put in 20 years. I'm longer than 20 years. He's 50 years old. He was going to go to another career, and I understand that for him and his family. Gary Myrick has been my chief of staff. He ran my office. But he loved this floor so very, very much. This was always his dream job. And even though he was, on paper, a big shot, being the Democratic leader's chief of staff, that isn't what he wanted to do. He wanted to come to the Senate floor where he was raised in his employment. And he knew this was the job that he wanted. And he told me that. And so I arranged things that he could come and be the secretary to the majority here. But he, Gary Myrick, and David Schiappa were always literally looking for a way forward. They sorted through what I wanted, what the Republican leader wanted, what members wanted, and they didn't always arrive at the conclusion that the Republican leader or I wanted, and sometimes that wasn't possible. But they really, through long, hard days and even longer nights, through holidays and birthdays, his friendly demeanor. And Gary's demeanor is not nearly as friendly as Dave's, but it's just as effective. They work so well together. They are really a team that someday, when the history of this institution is written, they'll have to talk about these two good men who made this place work through some of the most difficult times this body has ever seen. He'll be missed by Democrats and Republicans alike, and that is the truth. Now, he's all the times that we've talked we've talked about important things most of the time. He and Gary, I understand, have been working together in the 80s, and they're supposedly great storytellers, one and all. But I know that the time they spent together, supposedly, as Gary said, They would disappear. Gary would disappear. And he would come back and I said, where you been? He said, well, I was with David. What are you talking about? And he would say, oh, here was his response to me. I want to make sure I get it right. Gary would say, I have no idea. But that was only a way of covering for both of them because they were so candid and forthright with each other. They always have been. And they would never, ever divulge anything that I was doing or going to do or that Leader McConnell had done or going to do. They were absolutely confidential in their communications with each other. That's how they trusted each other. So when Gary said he had no idea, he knew every idea. He just wasn't going to tell me what they talked about. And I'm sure passing the hours with each other, two such fine men, even though they were difficult situations, they found themselves forced to talk. I'm sure time passed quickly because they're such good people. I know that he will be successful, David, at whatever he does. I congratulate him and thank him for 3 decades of valued service to the United States Senate and to our country. I wish him and his wife Cheryl and his children, Allie and Mason, by the way, that's my middle name, you know, the real happiness. I really mean it when I say parting is such sweet sorrow. The chair announce the business of the day.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 11 a.m., with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, and with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, I thank the majority leader, the Republican leader, for what they expressed about David Chiappa. We rank and file senators feel the same way on both sides of the aisle. I was reminded that the late Alex Haley, the author of Roots, once said that when an old person dies, it's like a library burning down. Now, David is neither old nor dying, but there's some similarity in what's happening because with his leaving after 30 years, a number of volumes from the Senate Library are going out the door. We won't have that wisdom, that experience, that knowledge that's been so valuable to us. And that's been especially important to a Senate where nearly half the members are in their first term. Because this is an institution that depends on precedent and understanding and respect of its strengths over a long period of time. I've had a chance to work with Dave at the request of Senator McConnell at the beginning of the last 2 Congresses to work on the Senate rules. And in working with David and with Gary, what I found is they were representing our point of view, but they also had such a love of the institution that they wanted to make sure that whatever we came up with enhanced it, strengthened it, and didn't destroy it. So we wish Dave the best. We've admired his service and his friendship, and we hope that over the next few years he'll allow us to bring those volumes of wisdom and knowledge and experience back because occasionally we may need to read them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Mississippi.
Mr. President, I'm very pleased to be able to join my colleagues in wishing Dave Chiappa well in his next adventure in life and knowing it will be successful and also build upon his knowledge and experience here in the U.S. Senate. I know his contributions will continue, and it will be a pleasure to continue to follow him in whatever career or non-career or long vacation, whatever he chooses to do, will be happy and rewarding, as has his tenure here in the United States Senate. No one is more respected, more appreciated than David Chiappa. So it is a sad day in many ways to see him leave, but a happy one to know that he's going to begin a new era, and we will watch him closely and stay in touch with him and continue to appreciate him throughout his career in life.
Senator from Wyoming.
Mr. President, I'd just like to add to the comments. In Wyoming, we have what's called the Code of the West. And while David Chiappa may be the man of Washington, he abides by the Code of the West. There are 10 points. I won't make them all, but it's to live each day with courage, take pride in your work, and we see that year after year. Do what needs to be done. If you make a promise, keep it. We also say ride for the brand. Finally, we say, and this really applies to David, it's speak less and say more. And this is a man, when he speaks, we all listen, like the old E.F. Hutton commercials, but he really does epitomize what we look to in terms of leadership, and the guidance has been so wonderful for all of us. So I just wanted to rise from the West to tell you that, Mr. President, that David Chiappa has done a remarkable job for all of us, of both parties, and a wonderful job for this country. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, many of us will be leaving in the next day or so, heading homes to states across the country, and as we do, we'll be traveling our states, listening to our constituents and hearing what is on their minds. One of the things that I hear about every weekend in Wyoming is that people are concerned about the President's health care law, and specifically how the law affects them, affects their lives, affects their families, affects their jobs. And people all across Wyoming, and I believe all across the country, are angry. Angry that the White House is unfairly giving employers a one-year delay in the mandate to offer insurance, but did not delay the individual mandate, the mandate that says every American must buy or hold Washington-approved insurance. And for many of these people, this is very expensive insurance. Instead of granting a permanent delay or helping all Americans, President Obama and his supporters are trying to convince the American people that this health care law is working just fine. Once again, the Obama administration is lecturing the American people instead of listening to the American people. They think that if they just give more speeches and deliver more sales pitches, that the American people will finally like this law. It's not going to happen. But just look at how far the Obama administration is willing to go with its latest sales pitch. Last week, CNN reported that the administration called together a bunch of Hollywood celebrities to help convince young Americans to buy expensive health coverage. Mr. President, the youth of America are not going to fall for it. Even though many of these Hollywood stars are great actors who always remember their lines, young Americans understand that Obamacare is the wrong script for America. Even though some of these stars deliver funny jokes on Saturday Night Live, they are about to find out that this health care law is no laughing matter. In fact, Americans of all ages believe that the law is unworkable, unaffordable, and deeply unpopular. They're also finding out it's unfair. That's what CBS found out last week. They did a poll.
They found that 54% of Americans disapprove of the law. It also found that only 13% of the people say that the law will actually help them. The law will hurt them personally than the people that it will help. So over the next couple of months, the American people can expect a barrage of advertising. There was a big story about it today in the New York Times about musicians playing songs on the West Coast, trying to get people to sign up for the exchanges, all aimed at trying to distract the American people from the health care train wreck that is coming. According to the Associated Press, at least $684 million will be spent nationally on publicity, on marketing, and on advertising for the law. The Washington Post found that the states will be running ads not just on TV and radio. You're not going to believe this. They're also putting slogans on coffee cups, on airplanes flying banners across beaches, and even, believe it or not, on portable toilets. Nearly $700 million, a windfall for advertising agencies and a hard sell for hardworking taxpayers. So the administration is picking the pockets of the American people for advertising, while the health care law is shrinking the paychecks of the people who can only find part-time work. Speaking of part-time workers, I'd like to talk about a news story that has come out that demonstrates the height of hypocrisy surrounding the president's health care law. Frankly, the story is so outrageous that it's one of those things that you can't even make it up. The headline of the article reads, quote, "Half of Affordable Care Act call center jobs will be part-time." Here are the details. The article is about a new call center in Contra Costa County, California. This is part of an effort to have the so-called navigators who will answer Americans' questions about the health care law. The call center ran ads for more than 200 jobs, and it said that all of these jobs would be full-time. That's what people are looking for in America, full-time jobs, full-time work. But once the new workers started training, some of them got a different story. They found out that they would actually be part-time employees with no health benefits. Let me emphasize that point. Even the Obamacare navigators are not going to be covered by the health care law and are not going to be provided health care. Even some of the navigators will not know how they can get affordable health care coverage, even though they're the ones that are supposed to be giving advice to Americans. Even some navigators are being forced to work part-time because the company cannot afford to provide the expensive government-mandated approved insurance that they're supposed to teach others how to get. It turns out that the Obamacare navigators need their own Obamacare navigators. The article even quotes one worker saying, "What's really ironic is working for a call center and trying to help people get health care, but we can't afford it ourselves." That's what this administration has done to this country. I don't call that ironic. I call it outrageous. So the question is, who are the navigators going to call for help? And how are they going to answer Americans' questions when many of them don't know how they are personally going to be able to afford the health care coverage that the government and the President of the United States mandates that they have? Now, the bad news is that this story is only one of many new examples of hypocrisy recently surrounding the President's health care law. Week after week, we have seen labor unions, one after another, labor unions who originally supported the law, now express concerns about how the health care law will impact their members' access to care. Late last week, we even heard from something called the National Treasury Employees Union. It's important to know that this union represents most of the IRS workers, the 100,000 IRS workers who are the ones who are going to be enforcing the health care law. And what about these IRS workers? What are they saying? Well, it turns out the IRS employee union said they are very concerned that they might actually have to buy their own health insurance in the exchanges, just like other Americans. Now, these are the exact same IRS agents who will collect massive amounts of data, personal data on people's individual lives and their health care choices. They will investigate whether people have the right coverage. They will apply the tax penalties to anyone who doesn't. These are the agents who now say they want no part of the health care law's exchanges for themselves. They actually have sample letters that the union has sent to the IRS agents to send to members of Congress to say, I am one of your constituents, and we don't want it to apply to us, and we want to hear back from you. Well, this health care law is bad for all Americans. Each of those stories demonstrates again that the President's health care law is fundamentally broken. Instead of spending the rest of the summer trying to sell an expensive, failing product, the President should simply listen. He should listen to young people who are about to see their premiums soar. He should listen to Obamacare navigators who can't find affordable health care. He should listen to the IRS agents who enforce the law, who don't want to live under the law. He should listen to the American people and what they have to say about the high costs of their health insurance coverage. He should listen to what Americans have to say about how hard it is to find a doctor who will take care of them. Front page story, so many people on Medicare cannot get a doctor to take care of them. Why? Because of the health care law. 20% of family physicians in this country, the story reported in the Wall Street Journal, 20% of family physicians are not taking new Medicare patients. 33% are not taking new Medicaid patients. But a big part of the President's health care law was force more people onto Medicaid, a program that is not working already. The President should listen to what Americans have to say about how hard it is to keep their current coverage. And the President should listen to what the American people have to say about trying to make ends meet on a part-time salary. A part-time salary because of the health care law, because of the incentives of the health care law to knock down employees' work hours to fewer than 30. Then he should come back to Washington after he actually listens, not lectures. Come back to Washington, sit down with Congress, Republicans and Democrats working together, and work on real solutions that will give Americans what they wanted in the first place with health care, which is the care they need from a doctor they choose at lower cost. Things that have not been provided under a health care law. And remember, as Nancy Pelosi said, first you have to pass it to find out what's in it. The American people now know more and more what's in this health care law, which is why it is even less popular today than it was the day it passed, and why for every one American who thinks they will be helped by the health care law, 3 Americans believe that their lives will be made worse by the law forced through this body. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Alexander.
And we're waiting for senators to come back to the floor. A reminder, about 11 o'clock they start considering a nomination for the U.S. Appeals Court. They'll follow that vote with a vote on limiting debate to spending on 2014 transportation, housing, and community development projects. Then later this afternoon, senators working on the nomination of Samantha Power for U.S. Ambassador to the UN. Also right now over on C-SPAN 3, we have live coverage of the House Ways and Means Committee. They're having a hearing with the acting IRS commissioner on the Health Care Act implementation, and our live coverage right now on C-SPAN 3. We'll continue to watch the Senate, as we always do, right here where we cover it on C-SPAN 2. So as you can see, we're waiting for senators to come back to the floor. The day today should be some general speeches. Then in about half hour or so, we expect a nomination to be considered for the U.S. Appeals Court. That vote followed by a vote that would limit debate on 2014 spending for transportation, housing, and community development. There'll be a little break there about 12:30, as you can see on your screen, a barbecue, even though it's raining here in Washington today. And then senators back this afternoon to debate the nomination of Samantha Power to be U.S. Ambassador to the UN. Our live coverage of the Senate is always here on C-SPAN 2.
Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that further proceedings under the quorum call be dispensed with. Mr. President, if you come to my office in the Russell Building, you'll usually be greeted by one of the young and eager staffers who welcome visitors and who answer the phones at the front desk. Every once in a while, you'll find instead someone with a little more experience, my Chief of Staff, who's got now about 30 years of Senate service, in fact. Now, David Lyles often takes time to sit at the front desk and to answer phone calls, not during the slower, easier days of a summer recess, but always instead when constituent calls are the hottest and the heaviest. It's his way of staying connected to the flow of feedback coming into the office and of letting the staff know that everybody, from the most experienced staffer to the most recent college graduate, is responsible for responding to the people that we all serve. But it's also his way of providing some relief to the pressure that these young new staffers are under, particularly when answering the phone calls at various times when issues are very, very contentious. That hands-on approach is emblematic of David's leadership that has meant so much to my work in the Senate and to me personally. At the end of this week, when David Lyles retires from the Senate, we're going to miss his passion, his dedication, his South Carolina maxims, his encyclopedic knowledge of the Senate, Civil War history, and also his vast knowledge of the best bicycling routes in Northern Virginia. Nearly all of David's professional life has been in public service, and nearly all that service has been spent with the aim of strengthening our nation's security and honoring our commitments to the men and women of our military. Of more than 30 years of Senate service, most have been spent with the Armed Services Committee, first as a professional staff member, then as Deputy Staff Director, and from 1997 to 2003 as Director of the Democratic Staff, before agreeing to serve as my Chief of Staff in my personal office. He also served earlier with the Senate Appropriations Committee as a civilian member of the Pentagon staff and as Staff Director of the 1995 Base Realignment and Closure Commission, a difficult and at times thankless job that was nonetheless of major importance to our nation. His Armed Services Committee career encompassed some of the most significant national security challenges of our time: the end of the Cold War, the Persian Gulf War, the 2001 terrorist attacks, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as the immense technological changes and major budget challenges that we have faced during his years here. I've asked David twice to change jobs. First in 1997, when I asked him to leave a brief stint in the private sector to serve as Democratic Staff Director on the Armed Services Committee, and second, when I asked him to give up that position to join my personal office as the Chief of Staff. Now, I made these requests because I value his judgment, his knowledge, and his integrity, and because I know of his love and his respect for this institution. When new staffers join our office, David will usually walk them down to this Senate floor, bring them to the staff benches, behind me, along the walls, give them a chance to see in person what most have only seen on C-SPAN, and to share some of the mix of excitement and responsibility that David still feels when he comes to this floor. David once told a reporter from the Washington Post, quote, "I've always felt that anonymity was the key to job security," close quote. Well, I'm sorry to blow his cover, but David's outstanding career is worthy of public praise. He served the American people in the United States Senate with great distinction. He has helped protect the men and women in uniform and their families. He has led the men and women in his charge with patience and loyalty and modesty, and at times of great challenge for the Senate and the nation. I am, and I always will be, deeply grateful to David Lyles for his wise counsel, for his loyalty, for his friendship, and above all, for his integrity. I wish David and his wife Annie a long and a happy retirement, full of visits with laughing grandchildren, untroubled waters to paddle, and smooth roads to ride.